Email todayradio@rte.ie.
Well, during the general election campaign, there was extensive discussion of the retention and role of the Special Criminal Court. Now the issue has re-emerged amidst the government formation talks due to the need for legislation underpinning the controversial court to be renewed by next Monday, as I was just discussing there with Mary Lou MacDonald from Sinn Féin. Now, some people believe it operates outside the general constitutional and international standards of the right to a fair trial, while its proponents argue that it has helped the state to successfully prosecute some of the country's most dangerous criminal gangs and terrorist groups. Well, joining me now in studio to debate the issue is Jennifer Carroll MacNeill, a barrister and Fine Gael TD for Dunleary, and Michael McNamara, a barrister and independent TD for Clare. And thank you both for joining me this morning. Jennifer, I might come to you first because June 29th is seen as a hard deadline in order to renew the offences against the state in the Criminal Justice Act. What, in your view, are the consequences if it's not passed?
If it's not passed, the consequences are quite serious. The consequences are that the pending cases and the cases that are currently under investigation, under Garda investigation, will be impacted. So it is a deadline. It comes up in the Oireachtas every year, and we review it every year, and we review it on the basis of Garda evidence to the Minister for Justice, who presents the case to the Oireachtas, and it's debated and parts of it are renewed on an annual basis. And that's done. That's different to other pieces of legislation, and it's important because it is a different sort of court mechanism. It is outside the normal jury trial processes. There are good reasons for having it, and we can discuss that. But because it's different, we do bring it back to the Oireachtas for elected representatives to discuss it every year and to monitor the necessity of its continuation. This year, the evidence is that it is necessary that it continue. We have a threat level in Northern Ireland that the PSNI regard as severe, that they've communicated that to the British government. We have a land border. We have very significant links between dissident Republicans and criminal gangs in this state. Gangs and dissidents who don't respect the institutions of this state and certainly don't respect the life or well-being either of potential jury members or witnesses, and it's because of that we have this special and different criminal justice process to be able to prosecute those parts of the most difficult parts of the criminal justice system and security system, and to be able to prosecute those successfully through the courts. All
right, Michael, you disagree. You don't think
I do. I mean, the Interpretation Act 2005 provides that where an enactment is repealed, the repeal does not prejudice or affect any legal proceeding, civil or criminal, pending at the time of the repeal in respect of such right, privilege, obligation, liability, offence or contravention. So I don't accept that it would affect investigations in being. I don't accept that it would affect criminal proceedings which are pending or have been initiated in the first instance if it was to be repealed. But the bigger issue is... So because it's already there on the statute book, or was when these cases began, exactly. You think that the courts would interpret it still being there? I think it would. The existing case would be able to proceed. But the bigger issue is, I mean, Jennifer mentioned Northern Ireland and the threat level in Northern Ireland. I mean, in Northern Ireland and in the United Kingdom, they've brought in non-jury trials, but they've brought in safeguards that you have to persuade a High Court judge that there's a particular reason that this can't be heard by a jury. There is no safeguard in Ireland, and that lack of a safeguard has been consistently criticised by the United Nations. Now, either the United Nations is important or it's not, and I think it is important. But I mean, if the United Nations is not important such that we're going to completely disregard 20 years of advice from the Human Rights Council and the Human Rights Committee which preceded it, then why did we spend a huge amount of, I don't know how much money we spent, maybe Jennifer knows, in our bid to get on the Security Council. But we as a country have always said that the United Nations is important. We have always said rule of law is important, and this is something that we've been consistently criticised by in international fora such as the UN Human Rights Committee. We've also been criticised at home, and not by sort of renegade subversives. I mean, Anthony Hederman, who was a judge of the Supreme Court, who was an Attorney General in Jack Lynch's government, led a committee to look at it, and he came up with a minority report along with two other members, Dermot Walsh and William Binchy, saying it should be abolished in its entirety. Now, that was a minority report, even though he led it, but the majority, all of them, accepted that safeguards had to be put in place to ensure that the way the DPP can just choose to have a case heard in the Special Criminal Court needed to go, and legal safeguards had to be put in place. Now, those recommendations are 18 years old now.
All right, Jennifer, on Michael's first point, either we agree with the UN or we don't, or we listen to them or we don't, or we respect them or we don't.
Yeah, I agree, and we have been members of the Security Council before during the period where we've had the Special Criminal Court, but you have to look at our criminal justice system as something that's a little bit different to around Europe and other parts of the world, where we have a policing system that's essentially non-armed, that's essentially by consent. We don't have comparable policing and criminal systems to other places. We have a common law system.
Similar system to the United Kingdom.
We have a similar common law system, correct. But we just don't have, and we have had this since 1972. I have no difficulty with reviewing things. I'm very strong on human rights, very strong with the ICCL, no difficulty. But the particular issue is about its renewal before Monday and its continuation before then. And we're not going to be able to do that in that period. That, as you said, was a minority report, and there are competing views on it. And one of the best safeguards that we have is to bring it back for debate among elected representatives. And that's a really important. That's a really important format.
But that's the point, Jennifer, that like when the Oireachtas brought in these, they accepted that these were draconian powers and they needed to be reviewed. Now, properly reviewed. But instead, what's happening is this has been rolled over on a year-by-year basis without any review. Now, personally, I'm going to put down an amendment suggesting that the Law Reform Commission, which everybody accepts is completely independent of government and performs a very important function, that they look at this issue, that will be renewed to avoid any possibility of any fear in the general population, that it be renewed for a 7-month period, and in the interim period that the Law Reform Commission look at this issue and come forward with recommendations.
Well, I think, look, there's two things.
And I think,
let Jennifer in.
But there's two things. I mean, one, there's the continuation of it on an ongoing way and the legal processes that may or may not be changed. I don't have a difficulty with that. But the issue is the Minister for Justice is being briefed from a policing and security perspective as well as a legal perspective, and that's not briefing that we're all that we get that you and I get on a weekly or monthly basis or anything else. And that briefing is also in consultation with the PSNI, and that relates to significant and ongoing severe security threats. We have seen it's not just in terms of dissidents, it's in terms of criminal gangs and the links between dissidents and criminal gangs in terms of the weapons that we've seen, the armoury that we've seen, the disregard for human life that we've seen. And so this is a security and policing thing. So in terms of the decision that needs to be made next week, the advice that we are getting is that this is a necessary security measure. I have no difficulty with the Oireachtas looking at this in a whole range of different ways, but for the purposes of next week, it must continue.
So then would you vote for an amendment that said that the matter be referred to the Law Reform Commission so that they could actually look at it, as opposed to just rubber stamp this for another year and year?
Voting on any amendments that I haven't seen, haven't discussed with the Minister for Justice, haven't discussed. I mean, that's just going a bit far. Let's just treat this with the seriousness that it needs.
We roll it over year on year. Now, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, its predecessor, which was led by Maurice Manning, a former Fine Gael TD, questioned the necessity for the 2009 Act when it was being introduced. He said it was contrary to international human rights standards. The current Human Rights Commission is doing yet another report into this. In response to that, Drew Harris said that it was quoted as saying that the Special Criminal Court provided an essential service in combating organised crime and terrorism, but added he would not be concerned at a review. Well, I say two things that, A, let's have the review, but the role of the courts is not to be an essential service. The role of the court is to be independent and to determine it's for the police and the DPP.
I just want to clarify, Jennifer, do you accept there are issues with the Special Criminal Court?
Oh, absolutely. I accept that it's a non-jury court, and it's a very specialised sort of court, and you have to have...
do you have concerns about it?
I don't have concerns about its continued operation. I'm always open to reviewing how things work and the particular safeguards that are there for people. Don't forget that its decisions can be, are treated in the same way, can be appealed. It's the only difference is that you take the jury out of it and the threat for witnesses out of it. And
you don't take the threat for witnesses out.
Yeah, it's for very good reasons.
And threats to witnesses are an ongoing problem in trials right across the country. I've seen it myself in criminal trials, or at least I've suspected that witnesses have been threatened. But there is absolutely no witness protection. And I think threats to witnesses...
But it does help for juries, Michael.
Yeah, but the lack
thereof, obviously.
Threats to witnesses are a bigger problem than threats to juries. I mean, in the United Kingdom, you can anonymise juries. Juries can be behind a curtain, for example. There are things that can be done, but none of these have been investigated. Instead, this has been put before a Dáil and told, take it or leave it. The heavens will fall if you don't vote for it, instead of having a debate. Let's this year have a debate. Let's this year refer it to the Law Reform Commission, who everybody accepts are independent. They're non-political. Take it out of the political realm, give it to the Law Reform Commission, and then come back in 7 months' time and vote.
You're right. Let's just take this to conversation out of the political realm and the realm of the Law Reform Commission, and just think about how this is applied. Enda Kenny down in the North Inner City in 2013-14, where people being shot on an incredibly regular basis related to drugs and gangs, and saying, I will do whatever I need to do to help you to regain stability within this community. We saw it the same in Limerick. We wouldn't have been able to get the prosecutions of the drug gangs without that. So take it out. You're right. And we can have these debates and we can have them in a measured way within the Oireachtas. I have no difficulty with that. But just think about people in communities where... well, can we get a government? Can we get a government at the end of the week? And I have no difficulty with discussion about it, Sarah.
Would you like to see a commitment from Fine Gael? Because correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen any commitment from Fine Gael to review this, to review the role of the Special Criminal Court and the operation of it.
I don't have any difficulty continuing to look at it. We do it on an annual basis, and we can do it in different ways.
No. I'm asking about it because again, this is a big issue during the election. Mary Lou McDonald said what she would like to see is a review of it. I'm asking, do you think Fine Gael should commit to a review of the Special Criminal Court and the issues
I'm not going to make that this week. This is a big week for lots of different reasons. The most important thing with the Special Criminal Court is that it is a big issue, and
there are human rights issues,
and it will still be. You're right, Sarah, and it'll still be a big issue.
Consistent criticisms
Michael,
of Ireland.
It will still be a big issue next week and the week after, when we can make measured decisions about the sorts of processes that we do and the sorts of reviews that we do. I have no difficulty with that. Excuse me, Michael. But in the meantime, the first and most important thing is its continuation next week. And the advice that I have is that is essential.
I do understand that. I just
continue it. But continue it while we send it to somebody to be reviewed. The Law Reform Commission, would be quick as opposed to setting it. We already had the Hederman Committee look at it, and they recommended that safeguards be put in place. Nothing happened. Mr. Justice Hederman himself, who was a former Attorney General and a Supreme Court judge, said it should be abolished, as did William Binchy and Dermot Walsh, who are eminent legal scholars. They all recommend it should be abolished in its entirety. But let's not just ignore consistently the recommendations of bodies that have been set up to look at this: the UN Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Committee, the UN Special Rapporteur.
I'm just wondering, Jennifer, on Michael's point, why TDs should be asked, TDs who have genuine concerns about this, like Michael, should be asked to, as he puts it, rubber stamp legislation without being given the commitment that their concerns will be reviewed by an independent body.
TDs can come in and make whichever points they like, can raise those points, can have a debate in the Oireachtas. There's absolutely no difficulty with that.
An independent review is what I'm asking.
And I'm not going to commit to any of those things. This is the Minister for Justice bringing it back on the advice, and I respect all of those points that you've made, but this is on the advice of the Gardaí.
Okay, can I ask you, I'm not asking for a commitment, I'm just interested in your thoughts on this. I mean, you work in the legal world, you understand this better than many people. I'm asking, do you think there should be a review?
I am always open to a review of any court processes to make them better, to safeguard human rights and make sure that they work, and that's not just limited to the Special Criminal Court. Absolutely, I've no difficulty.
There should be a review.
No, I didn't say that. I said I'm always open to it, Sarah. Meanwhile, I'd like to go through the debate tomorrow.
What's the difference between those two things? So does that mean you don't think there should be a review?
I said I'm always open to it. I said I'm always open to it. I've always open to it.
Okay.
But it's a matter for the next Minister for Justice and the next government, and it isn't for me to sort of preempt what they might decide to do.
All right. Michael, another issue here is that we need the Seanad to be fully constituted in order to pass this legislation ahead of next Monday's deadline. But you believe the current Taoiseach Leo Varadkar can appoint the 11 nominees to the Upper House, allowing it to sit.
I mean, there's an argument being made. I mean, it's not for me to make it, but there will be
your copy of the Constitution there.
I did, because I thought I'd be asked this question. I mean, there's an argument that will be made in the High Court tomorrow on behalf of Michael McDowell, who's a former Attorney General, Ivana Bacik. I don't think anybody would accuse them of coming up with spurious arguments. I believe it's going to be quite interesting from a legal perspective, because the current Attorney General is going to appear in person defending what we're told is his advice, and you've John Rogers, who's a former Attorney General, representing McDowell and Bacik. But the Constitution says Seanad shall be composed of 60 members, of whom 11 shall be nominated members and 49 shall be elected members. So that would suggest that it needs to have the 11 and the 49. But then if you look at what Dáil shall be composed of members who represent constituencies determined by law, and the number of members shall be fixed by law, but the total number of members shall not be fixed at less than one member for every 30,000 of the population. So I mean, that would suggest that if you're going to apply the logic that's being applied in the Attorney General, what we're told is the Attorney General's advice, which we haven't seen. I hope whatever government takes power starts publishing Attorney General's advices, as they have done in the United Kingdom Parliament, because at the moment the Attorney General's advice is sort of waved about as some kind of a mystical sword that people can't challenge or go behind or question. I mean, there is, I think, a case to be made that nobody questions that the Dáil isn't properly constituted if there are 4 TDs. If you're waiting for 4 by-elections, that the Dáil can't make decisions in the interim period. And I think a similar logic would or could at least be applied to the Seanad. But that'll be determined by the High Court, hopefully by Friday, to bring clarity to the situation.
All right. If that case falls, Jennifer, and the Programme for Government deal is not agreed by all 3 parties on Friday, what is your understanding of what will have to happen at the weekend from a political perspective?
Okay, well, sorry, what do you mean by that case falling? What do you mean?
If it is seen that that this cannot be passed unless the 11th nominees are in place.
So that's the government's position.
Yeah.
That's the government's position. That's a very difficult situation then, and that's going to, to my mind, require a political resolution. And that's something that I think the party leaders are going to have to discuss, because it does need a political resolution, and it's a conversation at that level. If that is the case, I mean, look, what I'm hoping is that there is a programme for government agreed, that we will have a government, that there will be a new Taoiseach elected by the Dáil capable of appointing those senators under the Constitution correctly, and that then this matter,
Taoiseach, would that work?
and that this matter doesn't arise. If this programme for government doesn't pass, then we're in a different situation, and that's a political situation and will have to be resolved politically.
All right, we'll leave it there. Jennifer Carroll, MacNeill barrister and Fine Gael TD, and Michael McNamara, barrister and independent TD. Thank you both very much for joining me this morning.